High rates of sexual assault experienced by trans men present both challenges and opportunities for feminist frameworks of sexual violence. They force us to ask hard questions about how sexual assault is theorized and whether traditional models are flexible enough to account for trans men's experiences. Large-scale population surveys consistently show that over half of all trans men report having been sexually assaulted in their lifetime. That number is staggering. And what's especially significant is not only how often these assaults occur, but also the context in which they happen. For trans men, sexual violence most often takes place in private settings, within intimate relationships, or at the hands of people who knew them before they transitioned. In many cases, perpetrators use intimate knowledge of a trans man's body as a weapon. In other words, the violence is deeply connected to knowledge of anatomy and is used as a way of policing gender. By contrast, trans women are more often sexually assaulted in public spaces in the context of sex work. This comparison matters. It shows that sexual violence against trans people is not uniform. Instead, it takes distinct forms depending on how society treats our bodies and identities. Second-wave feminist frameworks often treated women as a broad, undifferentiated sex class. While this was politically powerful, it also meant that important differences, like those of sexual orientation and gender identity, are frequently overlooked. For example, the concept of corrective rape was long under-acknowledged, even though lesbians have historically been sexually assaulted as a way to enforce heterosexuality. For trans men, sexual assault can function in a similar way, as a violent reminder of our sex bodies, meant to undermine gender nonconformity. In that sense, we might think of these assaults as a kind of corrective rape aimed not at sexual orientation, but at identity itself. To explore these dynamics, it's useful to look at the three major feminist frameworks for understanding sexual assault. First, liberal feminists, such as Susan Brown Miller, in her landmark book Against Our Will, argued that rape is fundamentally political. It's a tool men use to dominate women as a class, keeping women in a state of fear, dependence, and subordination. Within this framework, the high rates of assault against trans men might be seen as evidence of a system of male political dominance and the enforcement of sex stereotypes. Second, radical feminists such as Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon placed emphasis on the sexualization of dominance itself. They argued that cultural norms eroticize male control and female submission, creating a continuum from what society calls normal heterosexual intercourse to sexual assault. The difference, in their view, lies in consent. Through this lens, the assaults of trans men might suggest that dominance is not only sexualized, but also weaponized against anyone clocked as female in a sexual context, regardless of gender identity or whether we conform to sex stereotypes. This certainly challenges the notion that sexual assault is about sexual attraction, but it does affirm that sexual assault is about male violence against women. Third, post-structuralist feminists, such as Sharon Marcus, approach sexual assault through textual analysis. They ask what cultural scripts teach us to understand sex, power, and violation in particular ways. From this perspective, the sexual assaults of trans men may reflect a broader cultural script in which gender nonconformity is punished and has implications for how trans men are psychologically impacted by sexual assault. So here are the questions I want to leave us with. Do the assaults experienced by trans men challenge feminist frameworks, or do they in some ways affirm them? Are these assaults best understood as political, as Brown Miller suggests, as sexualized dominance, as Dworkin and McKinnon argued, or as the enforcement of a cultural script, as Marcus asserts? Or do we need a more complex model that combines all three? What are the gaps? And finally, what do these experiences tell us about sexual assault more broadly? If most perpetrators are men, and if most targets are female, whether women or trans men, then what does that suggest about the underlying structure of sexual violence? By examining trans men's experience, we not only make feminist theory more inclusive, We also deepen its explanatory power. We gain a sharper understanding of how sexual violence operates, and we are reminded that theory must always bend to the reality of people's lives.